like, I mean, so there's no format for this podcast. Okay. The plan is we'll talk about this, Scotland, the Union, the independence, and all those things. So obviously, Josh is a passionate for Scotland's independence.
You can call me a nationalist. It's okay.
You are a nationalist. Nationalist has got this kind of term, isn't it? It's kind of almost on the edge of like derogatory terms, isn't it? Almost.
Absolutely.
It almost feels like an insult now to call someone.
I mean,
in Scotland, we proudly embrace it.
Yeah. I mean, I call myself as an internationalist. So I'm like internationalist. I kind of know.
Okay, internationalist. Wow.
So the internationalist is more like, I want to, live together with everyone, not with like, so there will be no border. There'll be no, like, any kind of top authority who will, dictate me what I should do and what I can do. So it's like empowerment of everyone, not only for the government, but the people as well. My stance is much more, open, free, it's the proper emancipation rather than going for another kind of structure.
I think the main problem with the term nationalist is just how dangerously misunderstood it is. There isn't one nationalism. This is just false. There just isn't one. There are so many different types of nationalisms, and consequently there are so many different types of nationalists and different nationalist movements. And that's definitely something that is wrong in our politics, is that misunderstanding. And I think, as I said, I think it's quite dangerous. The way people describe the term, the oft-cited connotations of the term, and how these nationalist movements link together. And I think even it means that people, particularly in the West, like to draw a lot of comparisons between different cases, because they argue that what links them is that word, nationalism. And it's just, I think sometimes the comparisons can be quite inappropriate and just also reflect the misunderstandings of the term.
Yeah, I find that just off what you said, it's so different, because when I think of nationalist, right now my family's from India, so I think of the Hindu Nationalist Party in India, who are just awful people. But obviously different nationalisms don't represent the same sort of, agenda, whereas theirs is to sort of take India away from being the secular state and making it into just a Hindu majority, which isn't representative of the country at all. We've got like all sorts, every sort of culture and sort of religion under the sun. And I don't think it's to put different nationalisms into the same bracket is really, I agree with that.
I think it's even interesting when you contrast that. So the example you said, with India, and even last week in Scotland, we had the Scottish Parliament elections, and we had refugees who could vote in these elections. We had prisoners who could vote in these elections. So it's odd when you use that term or what people understand of the term nationalism, and contrast that with the way the government's opened up the franchise for people to actually take part in our politics and our democracy. I think it kind of speaks also paradoxically to what you said, Shivani. It's like how the nationalism can be used to build something more inclusive versus something that's clearly more exclusive.
No, because we've seen, again, two types of nationalists, 47, and then you see this sort of nationalist movement, which is very much going against independence and sort of restricting people, different communities. And I think it's, just to build upon that, it's really dangerous to put both of those in the same category, because one's about freedom and one's about restricting communities that are equally at sort of an equal point in society where they do all deserve the same, recognition.
You yourself said that you are fine with like to call yourself a Scottish nationalist. I mean, but you can see that lots of people might see it in a different way.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I'm very fine with it. I would even say I'm comfortable with it. I think that that's how you break down misunderstandings, is to actually challenge people's conceptions about what terms mean. So the fact that someone in Scotland would openly embrace their identity, their political, someone like me would embrace their identity as a Scottish nationalist, clearly challenges some of the conceptions about what being a nationalist is and how that manifests in society. You know, I would say I have quite a open and progressive outlook on politics, but that doesn't, that's not incompatible with my ideas as a Scottish nationalist. Why? Because I think that only through having the powers of our own state will we be able to achieve further on the goals that we espouse as a party of government as well. But yeah, I'm very comfortable with it, but I also know that it's part of my nature of being comfortable with it that also means that there are oppositely people who are just as comfortable with the other side, you know, and we see that now in Scotland, very entrenched identities about kind of pro-union and pro-separation or nationalist, or there's so many different kind of labels you can put on it. Even just seeing yourself as Scottish now is somehow synonymous with being a nationalist as well. Even a lot of people conflate that strong Scottish identity with support for an independent state. Obviously, since 2014, it's become much more fixed in our politics, this idea of kind of constitutionalism, of independence, of identity. These things have become much, much more salient.
When you kind of realize, like sense that, you know, you feel yourself that I'm actually a nationalist. You know, I'm really proud of
how powerful that sounds, though, right? It has such force.
So like when what was that moment? I mean, when?
I remember going to, I remember in primary school. I don't remember very much, but it's also relevant a wee bit to why I want to teach as well. So one of my first memories I can ever remember in my life was doing something called citizenship in primary school. So it was about like how to be a good citizen, you know, democracy. You would go and vote and, you know, all that stuff. And then I remember it must have been about 2007 or 2011. So I would have been 7, 8, 10, 11, that sort of age. I remember going with my gran and granddad because they were off to vote in the election. And it was the first year, my gran and granddad, elections prior and every year before that election, voted the same way. They always voted Labour. And any opportunity they were given, they would always vote for the Labour Party, no matter which guise of it was, be it now what we call kind of Scottish Labour, be it like UK Labour, whatever. They would always vote and recognise and identify with the Labour Party. So it was either in 2007 or 2011 that changed for them. And I just remember, and they said, like, you know, I think I asked them, obviously being so naive and so young and, you know, doing all this citizenship stuff. So, you know, who did you vote for? And of course, I remember even seeing it on like TV, posters, you know, the election campaigns now that we just saw pass are very different to the ones clearly way back then. But I just remember having this kind of feeling that something was changing. And that was even as someone so young. Just had this feeling, you know, there's a change here, something's happening. And then it kind of coincided with the removal of the bridge tolls on the Tay Bridge. So you used to have to pay to cross that. So all of that sort of came about at the same time. And I think even at my young age, it just, as I said, it felt something was changing, but it also felt like this was an opportunity to do something different. So it wasn't just that there was change happening. I think for the first time, certainly, I know I was very young, but even just my family, there was a general interest in politics and a general optimism and hope for what could come from the changes. It was around about that time. That was around about the time that I kind of, as a young person, associated the change, even at that age, that we were beginning to see, and people's optimism that made me think actually that there's a powerful force there.
So like what kind of age we are talking about here? You were in the primary school.
It probably would have been, I couldn't give an exact, but we're looking at sort of 8, 9, 10. I wouldn't say I was a all guns blazing nationalist at the age of 8, but I probably shouldn't say all guns blazing. That only fulfills the stereotype. But yeah, I'd say about 8, 9, 10. That was when the interest was there. And then once we got to 2014 with the independence referendum, that's when I started to kind of poke my nose in a lot more, and was very much interested in having conversations about, where we were going as a country, well, nation, country, whatever, where we were headed. And yeah, that was kind of where the interest came from me, was, I guess, that initial stage, 2007, 2011, and then moving into the more kind of political education through secondary. Obviously, the referendum, which is just a seismic moment in any young person's interest in politics. I mean, I know so many of my friends, that was the moment. If you spoke to them, that was the moment. 2014 was the moment, because most of us at my age just narrowly missed out on being able to vote. So yeah, that was the moment. I think that suddenly became clear to me that actually, why is it that the decisions we make, or decisions that we want to make, we can't make because an institution situated in the heart of London has overarching authority on those decision areas. And even for a young person, I think that just didn't make sense. It didn't seem to make sense. And yeah, I'm guessing we'll come on more about the kind of specifics, but just looking at it institutionally, it just didn't make sense to me.
Shivani, what was your earliest memory about, some kind of consciousness about, I don't know, I mean, is it Britishness or British Indian or, British Asian?
I think in terms of British politics, probably the same as Josh when it was the 2010 election. And we were like year 6 and they were kind of like, oh, come on, everybody, let's go down and vote and do like a mini election in school. None of us knew what we were talking about. We knew the colours. So I was like, oh, I like blue, so I'm going to vote for the blue party. No idea what the blue party represented. Now you turn very much the opposite to the blue party. But that kind of thing at school, we never really talked about politics. We never spoke about it. We didn't know anything. I didn't know anything until maybe I was year 10 or 11, and which is I think 15 or 16, just when you're doing your GCSEs. And they spoke about just like they were teaching us government and how government works and all that stuff. And one of my teachers was like, oh, you seem to kind of grasp this concept better than anyone else. Join like the youth parliament. So I did. And that was like my sort of introduction into politics at 14 or 15 or 16, which I feel like is really late for somebody to understand what's going on in their country and how their country works. But in terms of like a national identity, I was asked about it yesterday, which was quite interesting, which is my flatmate, who is half Scottish, half English. They were talking about whether she's Scottish or English. And then they turned to everyone to me and they're like, what about you? And I'm like, oh, yeah. But I've always been brought up with this big sense of I'm still Indian. Like, regardless of whether you've grown up in Britain, my dad, we've got a really weird family background where my dad is Indian, grew up in Uganda, moved to India for a bit after Idi Amin, obviously, and that, I don't know if you know the context, but he moved to India for a bit and then moved to Britain. And my mum grew up in India, but her family had lived in Burma for quite a while. And wow. So all these random sort of, influences coming in, but always sort of that deep-rooted sense of you are still Indian regardless of where you've grown up, whatever, don't forget your heritage kind of thing. So I'd say I have like a big sense of Indianness as well as Britishness, but I wouldn't say English. I would say British. I wouldn't say that because I don't particularly agree with England and what England do. But then I'd say more British, even though I'm not Scottish or Welsh or Northern Irish or whatever. But I still,
But I think part of the problem is, obviously this colonial history also impacted lots of our understanding about who we are. One good example is, if there is a cricket match between Pakistan and England, it's just unbelievable, isn't it? So these are like third generation Pakistani. Yes, they support Pakistan team. It's just the whole stadium is run by, Pakistan supporters. But
That was interesting when it was it the World Cup and it was India versus England. And my dad was like, "Don't you dare!" And I was like, "But I don't know." And he's like, "Don't you dare support England." I was like, "Well, I don't know what to do." And I was like, "Whichever team makes it the furthest, that's the one I support."
It's kind of similar, and I'm not a big cricket fan myself, but in football, it's kind of similar logic because each nation of the UK has their own football team.
Yeah.
But more pointedly, if it's England, in Scotland, we have this phrase, anyone but England, so anyone can win. Doesn't matter who England are playing, the Scots will always give their support to the team that they're playing.
Arch enemy kind of situation that we'll never support them, like them kind of thing. I mean, it's like not like not in that crude sense, but there's something there always, and then also I think like when like Andy Murray wins Wimbledon.
He's so British suddenly.
Give him like knighthood, like Sir Andy Murray.
I think the British thing for me just always felt institutional. Like it was just an institutional identity. Like it was never an identity that I took on, even as a young person. I didn't see a Union Jack and feel that was me. Even as a young person, there's maybe many reasons why I didn't feel that way inclined, but I didn't ever look at a Union Jack and feel patriotic or feel at home. It never felt to represent me at all. But I think just the British thing, it just always had an institutional element, like it was for the passports or for registering for XYZ things. It was just a kind of, you had to do it because that was your citizenship. But in terms of national identity, in Scotland, you can look at some of the surveys done about national identity. Scotland or Scottish as an identity will win out. That's the one people will pick. Not to say that they don't work together. They do obviously have a relationship, Scottish and British identities. But I feel that it's institutional. It's very separate and detached from those national identities. Like Shivani said, like there's England and English, and then there's Scotland and Scottish, and so on and so forth. And for me, the British thing, bizarrely, maybe it's because we don't have a kind of truly federal system. The British thing I always associated with either England or just as a UK institutional identity, which had no salience in my life. It didn't mean anything to me other than that.
I think that's very good way to say. It's like it's more like bureaucratic rather than But I think like with countries like UK or the US or any superpower or like any former empire will always have the problem to portray themselves as nationalist, because it carries lots of other bad stuff. So that's why the Union Jack is always like problematic because it carries other things, you see.
As like a British Indian, it almost feels dirty to support it because I'm like, oh, but you
can see like
the history that it comes with. But then again, you're like, either way, you don't fit into either bracket, because if I go to India, they'll be like, you're British, and if I am here, they're like, you're clearly not British, you're Indian. And I'm like, well, which one am I?
But also like the way things are changing, so obviously this globalization and then movement of people from different parts of the world going to different places and then make their homes. I mean, I think 50, 100 years time, I think the world will be international anyway, you see. So like lots of demography will be changed, so I think so it's like continuous process, isn't it? This idea about my Britishness or someone else's Britishness. There will be a kind of hierarchy as well, that who's British first and then the second and then third. So that's like American politics now, isn't it? So the original owners.
I think that's what's really interesting, and I think it goes back to where we started when you try and understand the term nationalism. It's like, well, actually you have nationalisms that a political nationalism that works to create a state, which is what we have in Scotland. We have a political nationalist movement that's trying to create an independent state, breaking away from the UK as a whole. Tick. But I think what's really interesting is the way that those other national identities are or can be and are incorporated within a broader Scottish sense of identity as well. And I think like some of the most striking examples are Polish Scots. That's one of the biggest examples I can think of is the integration of Poles within Scottish society. And you know, there's countless other examples you can look at. There's even an English fringe of the Yes movement as well, English Scots for Yes. There's so many of these groups, and I think that's when you have to look at nationalism as something more than just yeah, it's hard to kind of boil it down to one word, but something more than just violence and, I don't know, blood and flags. Like it actually has quite a practical use in people's lives as well. It can help them understand and feel comfortable in the place that they want to call home.
I think it's really interesting that you said blood and violence, because I was just about to say what I associate with the term nationalism is independence, but with independence I always associate bloodshed, because of the sort of how partition and stuff happened, and then also the continuing consequences of it. Like you still have riots to this day in India and stuff like that, and that's my parents' earliest memory of nationalism, because my mum would have been about 10 when the big 1971 India-Pakistan war kind of happened, and sort of like Bangladesh independence and all of that stuff. That's like the only relationship that we have with independence. And that's what's always that term independence has always sort of triggered the term violence.
But I mean, I think like historically it's always been like that with independence. You cannot have independence peacefully.
I mean, look at Israel and Palestine, and you know.
So like so like same with like Scotland, I think, you know, so this independence movement. So I feel like personally as an internationalist, I mean, I feel that there is a like whenever Scotland talks about independence, you can see there is a microaggression from the Westminster as well, you know, like there is a like hierarchy there, you know, so we'll decide, not you. It's a problem there. And you can see like the things happen with like Ireland. It was not easy. It's a blood and violence, you see. So lots of unpredictability as well. So ideally the full structure wants to just, you know, maximize their position and try to maintain the status quo as long as possible, because the other option is, you know, either blood and violence or some kind of, you know, some kind of disturbance, some kind of upheaval. I'm not sure, like I'm kind of like bit of like rambled here as well.
I get you.
Yeah, I get that. And I actually think like what Shivani said is really interesting, because it's kind of related to like how people perceive these issues and those words: nationalism, independence, even something like political violence. You know, what is that? Like, what does that mean for people? What is it? What does it look like? When is political violence political or not political? You know, those sorts of things. I think they're really, really interesting. But also just like the historical memory about nationalism and independence. I found that really interesting, what you said, Shivani, about how for you and people you know, independence is so associated with a particular thing. Whereas to someone like me, independence means democracy, choice. I hasten to use the word freedom because I'm not quite believing of that kind of relationship that we have with England. But, you know, for some people it's freedom. And I find it's just interesting. It's just like the other side almost. And just how kind of I perceive it. Obviously growing up in Scotland and in the West generally, where these sorts of types of nationalisms we haven't really seen in the West.
I think nationalism coming from a colonial background is also really different, because it's not independence from someone that you've lived with in a sense of harmony almost. Not saying that Scotland and England have lived in harmony, but, you know, in relative sort of peace, and there is sort of devolution, which means that there is certain control, whereas the aspect of independence and nationalism from somebody or a group that has no claim over their own sort of territory or land is very different. And I don't know if that makes sense, but that's why I think it's so associated with violence, and people, especially my generation, that's sort of been ingrained in our sort of the way we think, is that this is the history of it, and that's why it influences so much. And when you think of peace and like freedom and democracy, I think that's what a lot of people went into with, especially with Indian nationalism. You go into thinking that that's what it was about, but it ended up in being, to this day, so much violence and so much sort of like just this disparity in society. How there are, it was never the society that it was imagined to be when people were campaigning for independence, when people were fighting for independence. And just leading up to it, all of that was so messy that when people now think about it, and if you've studied it, and if you have family that's lived through it, it's so hard to grasp the concept of a peaceful, easy independence, sort of a democratic independence almost. I don't know if that made sense. I feel like that was a bit of a ramble.
No, I think that's because, I mean, with me, like, you know, so if you talk about like Bangladesh's independence from Pakistan, you can see like it's like two parties, totally, you know, like not like equal parties. One has got the full power and the other one has got no power. So that's the situation, did you see? So one wants independence from that power. So we are talking about is a struggle of power. But so many people don't see that there is a power struggle between, you know, British and Scottish. So it's not like they're not shooting you. Like
I think
Pakistan killed like 3 million people, you know, so you can see.
I think it's a valuable kind of clarification, though. I think, as Shivani said, there's clearly a difference between anti-colonial nationalisms and the nationalisms that you see in places like Scotland. There's clearly a difference. Some people try, so despite that, some people still try to maintain that it is a colonial relationship. And I disagree with that. I don't think that's an accurate representation, and it's precisely for some of the reasons Shivani said. You know, what colony would have received a degree of devolution the like that we see in Edinburgh? I'd probably say none. So it's clearly a different relationship. But nonetheless, it's still something that persists, and some people, if you scroll long enough on social media, will be quite willing to argue in that vein.
I think part of it also has to do with how it started, almost, where it wasn't, you know, it was a union that was signed between the two countries however many centuries ago, and that's what I find quite different, is that it was, you know, that it was almost a mutual agreement to, from what I know, again, it could be different, but this is what I've been taught as an English person living in England for my whole life, that it was a union that was sort of made, whereas, you know, colonization is usually against your will. So I've always found the origins of both types of nationalism quite difficult to understand in that sense. But again, that's my perspective as an English person who's been taught in England.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing with Scotland is its nationalist movement's been so associated with one political party for so long that, you know, and I don't, you know, not to kind of disparage the Greens, but I think that, and clearly that even the election results just past what week show that there is one party that generally speaks for the Yes movement in Scotland, and that is the SNP. The Greens are clearly making inroads, and that's undisputable. But even with this kind of fringe group that decided to emerge, Alba Party, you know, they just completely got laughed off the electoral stage. They were unable to break in to really very much voters at all. And I think that's one of the interesting parts about Scottish nationalism, is its strong association with the Scottish National Party for so long. And actually now that, despite in 2014, the majority of Scots say no to independence, the SNP very nearly took a majority in last week's elections.
No, I think we can take some kind of small break to talk something else, you know.
Okay.
Because
I'm actively trying not to chat shit about my dad there for a bit.
it was getting like too dense, like, this technicalities. No, I think the one last point, because did you remember, like, I mean, you both use Twitter. My colleague Elliot put some tweet on, like just before the election. He was saying that, I mean, what do you mean independence? Because I mean, it's like we are talking about the two kingdoms signed this kind of, treaty of something.
Acts of union.
Yeah. And so the one kingdom can say that, oh, do you know what? We're out now. So, you don't need any kind of, things. It's just people. But again, the problem is, I mean, when you see the election and the election results, I mean, the Tories got quite a number of seats.
It's been well documented on social media, but it's very true to say that Westminster's judging the election results as if it was using the Westminster system. So everything that we do and we don't do is dependent on that magic M word majority, which we didn't get. Now, the way the Scottish system works, it's always going to, I mean, the Tories, even the day before, I think on Friday, they had quite a few of the Tory, now MSPs, former MSPs and so on, were on, and they were basically saying, just hang on for tomorrow. That's when the list results come out, and that's when our seats will be climbing up in the numbers. And they did. But that's not something that's, I mean, it is in terms of the Tories' electoral history in Scotland, but it's not something that's particularly new or unexpected. People knew that was going to happen. And obviously as well, it had emerged pretty quickly on once results started coming in some of those marginal seats, that the unionist voters, or I say maybe that sounds a bit harsh, voters who want to see the union preserved were willing to compromise on their political allegiances by voting for a party who ideologically is very different. For example, Labour voters voting Tory, Tories voting Labour, Lib Dems voting Labour, so on and so forth, were more willing to do that than nationalist voters were. So, it's no surprise that the results happened and panned out in the way that they did. And I actually think, given that everything that's gone on, we had the Alex Salmond issues as well. We had the Holyrood committee looking into the government's handling of complaints. We've had so much stuff that's happened, another term in government, and we were one seat short of a majority. I don't think that's particularly bad. I think that conversely is incredibly good. I think it's a real show of confidence in the SNP, despite obviously the Tories having quite a large number of seats via the lists.
Like for Shivani, how did you find this election? I mean, like, could you vote here? I mean,
so that's quite funny. I didn't think I could, and that was the same day as the London elections, and I actually could. So I went in, I think, an hour before the ballots were closing. I ran in and just quickly voted. But I always feel wrong voting in Scotland because I feel like I feel like it's not my place to decide, because I don't live here, and I won't be living here in a month, and it's not going to affect, it's not my future that I'm deciding for. So I always feel wrong voting with my intentions to speak on behalf of people that do live here, and that it will affect in the future. But I did vote, I will vote, but I always feel like it's not my place to say, even though it does affect me in England, it will affect me what Scotland votes. But again, all the sort of domestic things that comes with, I feel wrong voting for that.
But I mean, at the same time, I think these elections are not normal elections. It's a kind of, some kind of mandate for this independence movement as well. So if you want to, keep this British kingdom, one piece. So, I mean, you have got interest here as well.
No, exactly. I feel in that sense, I should vote here, and I do vote here. But that was my sort of dilemma, is that I vote for that reason, but also everything else that it decides is not my right to say.
Yeah.
So when it decides things like housing and education policy and, you know, any of that stuff, I don't think that's my right to vote with that intention, apart from the union, which is the main thing that I would be voting for. I don't know if that makes sense, but I always feel wrong.
It makes sense. But I mean, you can see like the whole election, the way it's being campaigned even, you know, so it looks like almost, you know, there is some bigger picture here. And if SNP gets that number of seats, that will make their life easy. And, you know, this independence idea.
To me, that's actually one of the really bad points about Scottish politics in recent years, is, and we've seen it, the Tories used it quite craftily in the last council elections, the local council elections, prior to these elections that we've just had, and the next batch will be due next year in 2022. It's this complete hyper constitutionalization of our politics in Scotland. So every single election is about the same thing, even though, for example, in local council elections, I could vote for a independent councillor, I could vote for a UKIP councillor, a Green, an SNP, Labour, Lib Dem. I could go through the whole plethora of different candidates that will stand in these elections. They have absolutely no bearing or ability even to influence an independence referendum or campaign or anything of that sort. And yet, you know, the Tories used it fantastically well in the last council elections, and you know, did quite well in those elections because they took that question about independence and put it on their leaflets for local council elections. Now, we're not entirely innocent of doing things like that either. I'm aware of that. But as I said, I think it's a really bad point about our politics that, you know, for example, when you're deciding things like council tax or, you know, all of these such issues, even more locally, you know, how schools run, for example, we're actually electing people who are elected on this idea of independence campaigning or not. You know, that shouldn't be. And it's very dangerous for our politics, I think. Which might surprise you as a nationalist. Yeah, but yeah, I do. I think it's very dangerous, very, very dangerous.
Like what Shivani told us, and then it's my own personal experience from my family background, and because you can see like the counter argument about independence is, oh, do you know what? There'll be a problem with your bank account or like the savings or, you know, like your mortgage and all those things. For our independence, we never thought about our mortgage.
No, but it's a very good point. And actually, I don't know if
we thought about whether we'd be able to live there or not.
Yeah, I don't know if you thought.
Because the whole idea was we'll be dead, you know. We want it because this is just, you know, we just cannot take it anymore, you know.
But that's one of these things in Scotland. We're notorious for being quite indecisive, and you know, despite this kind of stereotype of having quite a fierce character and strong will, we're actually, again, kind of stereotypically, notoriously, however you want to define it, seen as more kind of indecisive people and also quite fearful of change. And I think it's a good illustration in 2014. The highest voting yes areas were some of the most deprived communities in Scotland. Places like here, like Dundee. And, you know, the election results from last week surely shore up this idea of that going into potentially another referendum.
Because I think that this bigger picture, the structure, this system, that, you know, the modern liberal democracy, capitalism, all those things, it created lots of other like barriers for this kind of genuine, you know, emancipation of people. Because I mean, if you want emancipation, no, because those things are not important. No, you're losing your savings account. No. So basically, you want something for yourself. So the new you.
It's kind of sad, but the bit that always got me about this argument was about pensions. So the UK government would say, oh, well, you know, your pension's at risk. What pension? The one that's one of the worst in the developed world.
So that's the problem, because the bigger bureaucracy creates problem. People say, oh, I don't want to lose my pension.
No, even though it's terrible, but you know, that's okay.
So it's a choice between pension and independence, did you see?
Yeah, but that's exactly how it was for many people. You know, we laugh about it, but it's true. A lot of people saw it in that way and voted accordingly. And even, you know, going back, looking at the breakdown of who voted for what, you know, traditionally, and I guess even still today, it's true to say, older voters will be less likely to vote for yes than the youngest voters. And I think that's an interesting point in relation to what Shivani said about how she feels that being in Scotland but not living in Scotland yet voting in Scottish elections. I'm not trying to say that we should disparage the elderly, far from it, but I do think it's an interesting point to consider about this idea of the future and what you leave behind for people. And I've heard plenty of stories from older people, like even my gran, for example, you know, why do you vote for independence? Well, you know, it's, you know, we like Nicola, or we like the SNP, or we want to do things differently, or the best one, you know, we want to do it for you. We want to leave something better for the future. So that hope, you see, that hope that got me interested back when I was 8 years old.
This question can be tricky for Shivani, because I mean, if you talk about this independence and then, you know, this like integrity of this British Isles and then this British Kingdom. So when you oppose this Scottish independence, I mean, how much is like materialistic in that understanding? That, I mean, what to lose here for you? Would you think that your future would be more disrupted? The UK would be weakened? UK will have less money or less power? Do you think those things also come to your thought process?
Oh, yeah, I think as an English person thinking of Scottish independence, it's purely from a selfish point of view. It is, sorry, that I don't think we would survive. I don't think anyone would survive. And the closest thing that we have to what would happen is, I think, Britain leaving the EU. And that's what we think of, is that it's just going to be that whole situation again, but a lot closer to home, in the sense that I don't think England would survive economically, or just it wouldn't survive the political pressure of it. And I don't think, in a sense, I know Josh will probably know more about this than me, but I always struggle with the sort of idea of how the Scottish economy and stuff would survive, as well as the British, because I think they both need each other almost to be as powerful as they can be, whereas both independently, I think they are considerably weakened. And I think that's easy. That was easy for people to think about the EU, where they're saying all this money's going to the EU, we're not getting any of this money. And we've seen the sort of repercussions of that, where it's, you know, we did need the EU, and we still, I'm pro-EU, so we still need that union. Despite everything that goes on in the background, I think it's so important to preserve unions for things to work as efficiently as possible, even though that might mean that both independent nations are weakened. I think to come together, almost, it's more important. But that's, again, from a purely selfish English perspective. And I've not lived in Scotland long enough as sort of a homeowner, as a parent, as a, you know, as a pensioner, someone who's been to school here, to know how that truly affects Scotland. But that's sort of that selfish English perspective again coming out.
Well, I mean, that kind of makes sense, because if you see that, you know, the way we live our lives, so we are living in a kind of materialistic world, where, you know, so like for UK, if Scotland goes, that's a serious asset loss serious asset loss we are talking about. So, you know, I mean, you just cannot quantify in terms of, you know, financial kind of loss. We are talking about, you are losing land, you know, so like average price for any house in Scotland is over 150,000 pounds. You know? So if you talk about, did you see how much asset loss is involved here? That's like in a very basic level, you know.
And sort of industry is so affected, like so much agriculture in Scotland, and so much, you know, oil and sort of natural resources, and for that to be taken away from England would be disruptive. But also, I think to survive just on that for Scotland would be quite hard. I think it's that sort of both, it sort of needs to flow almost. And I know I can see Josh laughing, but it's a selfish perspective, because I'm thinking of our survival as well. Whereas like, if we lose all of those assets, we're pretty much screwed. It's quite a weird thing for me to, I don't know how to explain it, but it's that name. It's like going to an international level and saying, this is Scotland and this is England. It's a lot more complicated than going to an international thing and saying this is the UK. Do you see what I mean? I feel like the union just, it sounds like a more powerful thing, but then that's someone who's not a nationalist that doesn't know what they're talking about.
I mean, I think that philosophical understanding about this whole situation makes things much more complicated, isn't it? Because these are like two different aspirations, isn't it? So one
Sorry, I've got my coffee being delivered.
So like did you see? So like for Josh, it's something very special, something, beyond some of those things we talked about, this like materialistic gain.
I would qualify my nationalism a little bit. It's not totally, it isn't something that overrides absolutely every other type of politics for me. Whilst I did say, and I still believe that only through independence can we create in Scotland a society that I think is different. That's what the precondition is, creating something different. That's the qualification. If all we're going to do is replicate England or Westminster system in Scotland, but give it a Scottish flag and Scottish names, it's not for me. That's not why I'm here. Why would we do that? So it has to be something more. It has to be something different. Otherwise, surely then it just uncovers it as some sort of ethno-nationalism then. Because all you want to do is have the things in your name, with your flag and your people represented better. So that's the only important qualification I would put on it. It isn't something that's entirely without criticism and something that I just support blindly. It has to be guided by some kinds of ideas about something different. Or the creation of something different.
So we kind of take a bit of a small break to talk something else. Like, Shivani came from London to Dundee.
Big move.
But Josh came from
Dundee to Dundee.
Stayed in Dundee.
Yeah.
A long drive, Josh.
A very long drive, yeah. It's a horrendous journey. Yeah.
So, like, what to say here? Like, do you think these changes did good to you, or these changes, like give you better understanding how this, the UK politics work?
My time to shine, Josh.
Like this switch from London to Dundee.
Okay, got it.
It's very, very interesting, because I think even my parents were up last week, and the facts that in England we have no understanding of how Scotland works it's hilarious to me. I've had friends come and visit from England, and you get the Scottish banknotes, and they go home and they're like, would this work in England? And I'm like, it's the same currency, it just has a different picture on it. And going back to England, I think the most shocking thing was coming up to Scotland, living here for 6 months, and then going back home for Christmas in first year, and just that change where people look at you like, oh, it doesn't work here. Like it still works here. Like, give me a bloody coffee or something. And it's that change, but also the fact that people don't know if there's people don't know if there's a hard border or not. People don't know if there's you have to take your passport with you to show at like a certain checkpoint, and we just didn't know any of that. And I feel like maybe that's just because London's we're in our own little bubble. And I think that is a lot to do with London more than the UK in general, or England in general, sorry, is that we're so self-absorbed in our own identity that we think that we don't need to know about anyone else. But it is quite interesting, and we don't know anything about Scottish politics. I don't think people knew that Scotland had its own parliament unless you did history or politics at school, which I think is crazy, because it's shocking that people don't know that there is a Scottish Parliament, because we walked past Holyrood and my friends were like, what's this? I'm like, oh, it's Scottish Parliament. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, that's a thing here. And it's just all of those kind of things. It's really, really funny. Like, oh, so you're technically in a different country. I'm like, yeah, but also it's all of those kind of like little things that you've never thought about until you have to come to Scotland. But then it seems so stupid to explain to someone when you've lived here. You're like, no, but it's so simple.
I mean, why politics like these kind of things are least taught in the schools? So that's to do with that, the domestic politics, but also international politics as well. There's nothing much about history, about colonial history and all those things. It's very kind of something very bureaucratic, isn't it? It's just a country, just like we are good people, we are the Security Council member, we are a powerful country and all those things, but it's a kind of glossed over, and I think that creates problem, but also like lots of misunderstanding as well. Okay, Shivani. Sorry,
I said, I was like, I think, let me speak. No, I'm kidding. I think I'm very lucky in that sense that my secondary school, I'm from a very, very sort of like ethnically diverse part of London, and they had our teachers had a heavy focus on introducing us to sort of colonial history and how everything works. But if we hadn't had that, a lot of people I know don't understand anything. People don't know what Britain is. People don't know the difference between the UK and Britain, or like, what's England, what's Scotland, what's the Union, none of that. But that's an issue with like the national curriculum in general. I think people just don't want to teach the complicated bits of history. Now let's focus on the Tudors and like, the Crusades and stuff, because that is important to learn, but also I think a lot of people don't know about any of our actual current history and how that's affected how we function directly. But I don't know why the education system's like that. I think it's just a way of sort of sugarcoating history and making it seem all nice and dandy, and nothing ever happened. We didn't do anything wrong, but Russia did everything wrong, and so did sort of Afghanistan and whatnot.
I mean, if you have this kind of glossed over history, then there's not much. So you just like judge this political party, what they're doing now. So they're good with pension, they're good with punishing poor people, they're good with like they're good in against the immigrants and all those things. So just like the current situation, rather than the full picture of the society, the politics and everything, and then you judge that we need change.
I think that's really interesting, because during the local elections there was an old Tory party flyer that was going around Twitter in that suppression of history kind of thing, and that's why people don't know the history of who they're voting for most, of like, if you want a coloured person as your neighbour, vote for Labour. If you don't, vote for the Tories. But I think all of that suppression, we never learned about that. I learned about it in A-level history when I was learning about British history. I'm sorry, the making of modern Britain, which is 1945 onwards. And that's where we learned about things like the Brixton riots and, sort of Enoch Powell and his Rivers of Blood speech and all of that sort of hatred that has come in modern history. We don't learn about that. We learn about sort of old sort of feuds and things, but nothing that affects how our system still works today. And people who still stand, unfortunately, for those kind of ideals and values, which are sort of, they do exist, people just don't know about it.
I think just to kind of quickly follow on, then do you want me to switch to like Dundee as well?
Yeah both.
I think quick follow on just what you said. I think Windrush is a really, really, really great example of what you were kind of both just saying, actually, how that kind of colonial history, that's had a very tangible impact on a contemporary political issue. And it's like, how do you unpack that? And do we have the tools to explain that? And, in a school, if someone said, what is Windrush? What is this about? How would we explain that to people under the age of 18 in a way that is doing justice to the history, and also trying to give some sort of overview of actually all the factors that are involved in that. And there's clearly not a simple answer to that, but I think it's a good illustration of kind of what you were saying, both about the curriculum as well. I think, yeah, growing up in Dundee, studying in Dundee, working in Dundee, holidaying outside of Dundee. I do that. I do leave. Not so much just now, but I have holidayed outside of Dundee. I think it's quite interesting because our schooling system, of course, is different, and it has been for a long time. But we have one subject which, you know, I'm going off to teach, well, hopefully very soon, modern studies, which is a little bit different to what you have in England. It's
Don't have any of that.
Yeah, it's a kind of like middle ground between, I guess, it's like sociology, politics, and a little bit of modern history as well. So you cover things like, I mean, we studied like politics in the UK as a whole, social issues, you know, poverty, inequality, crime. Like for advanced mods, I did crime and the law, which in the UK, which looked at prisons and all that stuff. So we did quite a lot on like actual policies to alleviate issues, institutions, obviously, because you're doing policy. So I think, yeah, I was actually very lucky. I think kind of what you said, Shivani, about your secondary school being very good. Mine was also very good. I benefited from two very great modern studies teachers. And I put my interest in politics today and the course that I pursued, you know, in the last 4 years, largely down to them. Of course, it was my own interest, which went back to that thing back in 2007, 2011. But it was this idea, and I think that's what's interesting about me staying in Dundee. It was this idea that I used that as a way to explore the world, always have done and always will. So for me, even in this past year with Abdullah, like we all of us were on the Middle East module. Yeah. You know, being able to study the Middle East, that's a part of the world I had never covered in my life. Never. Yeah. You know, I'd never been. I had no exposure to that. I had absolutely no clue, bar from, you know, the kind of social media stuff that you saw. In Scotland, it's quite interesting, especially in relation to the events in Gaza just now. There's been always that association of the Free Palestine movement and a kind of pro-Israeli group through football in Scotland, in Glasgow, between Celtic and Rangers. So the kind of symbolism and the iconography has never been too far away. But again, in a very similar vein to saying, explain Windrush to people under the age of 18, try explaining the Israel-Palestine conflict to people under the age of 18. It's very tricky, if not impossible to do with the time and the scope that you have to explore these issues. But yeah, I think that was what was good about me growing up in Dundee, is I've actually learned so much about the world, and laterally all of us have been doing it from our bedrooms, but I've learned so much about the world just from my own home, which is kind of liberating in a strange way. It's weird being in your own place, but also learning so much about the world outside it. But yeah, I mean, for me, the decision to do that was just purely financial. You know, and I'm not trying to say, Shivani, you're absolutely loaded for coming up from London, and you know, I don't envy your decision. You will have a lot of, you know, the student debt with the English way of doing things. But for me, I had offers to go to Edinburgh, here obviously, Stirling as well, and I just decided on the balance of all the factors that I wanted to stay here. This is my home as well. This is the place I call home, and there's always an element of, you know, you want to try and reflect yourself and your own place as well in the institutions that are located within your city. So it's been quite a journey staying in Dundee and studying as well, and calling it home, calling it work, calling it life. Everything happens from here for me. So yeah, it's been good. It's been very good.
Like, I mean, with my personal understanding about this Scottish independence is, I mean, I'm internationalist, but at the same time, I came from a very, you know, very strong left-wing politics as well. So, I mean, ideologically and philosophically, I feel that if anyone feels oppressed, we have got to liberate them. So that's my understanding. So if Scottish population feel that, there's some kind of, structural problem that the power relation, and we feel like oppressed. And I think I will have the full support for that. So I will take side with the oppressed always. Because I mean, even that small, aggression, small violence against you is just wrong for me. So that's why, like last couple of days, I haven't been watching news that much because, this whole Israel-Palestine thing, it makes me so sad. So, I mean, it's so hurtful as well, I've got no connection, the physical or like, through relations or, family in like Israel or Palestine. But I feel that, it's just wrong, isn't it? Because it's just power relations. It's power relations. And this is just like, common human nature. If you feel occupied, if you feel like you are oppressed, you will always resist. That's just like basic. This is just basic. So unless we have those understanding, we will never solve this problem, you see. So it's not good for Israel. It's not good for anyone. You see, so you can just carry on this kind of thing, and then just perpetuate this violence again and again. So it will come back again and again, after 4 or 5 years, again and again. So, if you want to have that kind of neighborhood, good for you. But I'll not be part of that, and I will fight or put some kind of campaign against that kind of like aggression or oppression or those kind of power structure. In your very own personal life setting, if you feel that someone is always controlling you, where you can go, what you can eat, what do you do, I mean, it's just not nice, and it's just like so destructive things. That I can go anywhere now. I just start my car and I can go anywhere. But for some people, they just kind of move to the next door because they have to show passport or identity or like who you are, all kind of things. I think for me, those are aggression, those are violence, those are bad things. If you have that kind of society around you, it's just not nice. We have the resources in this world to have a decent life for everyone.
Yeah,
it's not like you have to leave because and then living is only possible if someone has to sacrifice. So we don't need those kind of conditions in our lives. We can be free, and we can be free with everyone, and everyone can be free with everyone. So we are where we are now. So like, what's next for Scotland? Can you give me like next 5 years scenario, Josh?
What's next? Wow. I think first and foremost, the elephant in the room that somehow we haven't actually really covered at all is the pandemic. There's still a lot yet to do here with that, and we're not by any stretch of the words out of the woods yet with it either. And I think Indian variant as well is proven to cause some issues with new infections. So I think in the immediate year at least, that is going to still dominate the discussions about really any form of politics. Will be about COVID. And of course, the PM yesterday said that they're going to be doing the review. It's going to be starting in spring of next year. So it's pretty clear that COVID is going to be on the political agenda for quite some time yet. In terms of more specific to Scotland, just prior to and after the election, Nicola Sturgeon said basically that there will be no referendum until we've kind of managed, dealt with, coped with COVID. I'm not quite sure what that is or what that looks like or what the time frame will be, but I think on the point of a referendum, for me, I think it will be midway through the next parliamentary term. So maybe 2023, that's probably when I could see it being a thing, because I think first COVID needs to be much under control, much more under control. Then you have to have that discussion, and then we have to decide a process. whether that means that, Westminster says no and Scotland says yes, and then we have to go to court, fine. Whether that means the UK government grants a referendum, which I think they will, then fine, we'll do it. And then I think, probably 2023. That's when I think we'll be seeing a kind of referendum or the beginnings of a campaign for one. It could be a little bit quicker, but I just think, we're looking at it, the review for COVID's March 2022, which kind of rules out the summertime. And then there's elections here in Scotland next summer as well with the councils. So, I think 2023, that would be when I would say. And I think, towards the end, obviously, whatever the outcome of that referendum is, there's going to be protracted process to create this new state, which I hope we can do. But that's up to the people. I'm not going to speak for all Scots, and that's something we'll have to do together.
And I think, especially Scotland, people like you understand that position, that we have got a serious issue now, this COVID.
Of course, yeah. Like I said, the nationalism's qualified, and, COVID's also a qualification to that. People's health, people's livelihoods, their education, their social relationships, all of that matters. And, that also matters in the context of referendums. We need to get people back into work. We need to get people feeling comfortable back at campuses. We need to get people medically treated. We need to understand the effects of long COVID. There's a lot of work still to do on that front. I'm a gradualist in that sense. I'm not someone who would put off a referendum indefinitely. I 100% think it should happen within this parliamentary term. But it's pretty clear that we've got some very serious issues to deal with first. And I'm not going to pretend that we don't.
Shivani?
I have no idea. I think I'm baffled every day about what happens and what we need to think about, because everything's changing constantly. I don't think there is any certainty as to what's going to happen in the next 5 years with anyone. I don't know how long this pandemic is going to carry on for. I think we've sort of got this hope off that 21st of June everything's going to go back to normal. Something like it's going to be like Thanos' snap and everything's back to normal. But it's not going to be like that. It's going to carry on for a very long time, and it's just going to, that is like what Josh said, it's going to shape a lot of future politics and policies and how people campaign and how people do things.
And I think also it's not only like UK or Europe needs to recover, it's the whole world.
You're seeing one of the biggest democracies in the world collapsing. You need to get people who have populations of billions need to vaccinate and need to support their people. I think that we forget how much international sort of security and politics affects us. So we can fully recover, but what is there to say that, our allies and our economic allies and things are going to recover? And who says that that's going to be a positive sort of journey almost?
I think that is the only certainty we have is uncertainty, isn't it? It's horrible. It's really horrible. Even for us in this position, we're touch wood, everything going well. We're going to be graduating in a month, and we're entering this world where there is no certainty. There is no guaranteed path. We're starved of optimism as young people as well. There isn't much to look to. Even those positive things we do have, I'm touch wood, hopefully embarking on my teaching course in August. But even that, I don't know what the conditions will be. I don't know if I'll get into schools. I don't know if I'll be able to attend my new university. I have no idea. And I guess more immediately, things like jobs, in places like Dundee, we're hearing quite frequently about businesses closing down. Just this past week, there was another chain that's announced that it's going to be closing a store in Dundee. Clearly, these are issues that we need to be dealing with as well. Otherwise, we're not going to have any tools of statecraft. There's going to be none of that, because the state's going to be paying everybody again, kind of like the furlough situation. The economy is going to be as it is, it's taken a dip, and the resources you have to do these big changes will become much less, and so will people's apathy increase, because they're going to become even more disconnected from politics and politicians. And the ideas of kind of false hope may be attractive for some, but that's exactly how some will perceive it as well. The idea of independence might go back to being like a pipe dream. It's just this kind of idea of, well, it's just this false dawn. How can things be that much better when we're that much smaller? But that's a battle that, as a nationalist, we have to take on. We have to keep people on side, and we need to keep convincing people that, despite the benefits of being part of the UK, and I don't deny, for example, the vaccinations has been a huge positive, being part of the UK. Fine, I said it. I agree. But that doesn't detract from the more serious decisions about, even the initial response. We were quite limited in our ability to do things because the furlough scheme didn't exist, or because, we were unsure about how borders would work in that sense of the word borders, in terms of things you close and open. We were unsure about how that would work. And even just when the furlough scheme came to be, I remember it being this short-term solution. It was wound down. It was then extended. It was then re-extended. Lots of people were made unemployed during those periods of winding down of the furlough scheme and its reinvention, or re-implementation or continuation, whatever you want to call it. And I think for Scottish people, it's like trying to manage those things. Like, how can we maintain the benefits of being an independent state, whilst also recognising limitations and being honest about those, and being quite upfront too. I think those issues matter to people. So does honesty. Honesty really matters.
Shivani, what's the way forward for you? So Josh is becoming a teacher.
Yeah.
I know you are going for some law thing. Like
I am. I'm
Law.
doing a postgrad diploma in law.
Awesome.
So, yeah, I'm joining the dark side. Joining the dark side.
Where are you going for that?
University of Law at Bristol.
Nice.
So it's like a year long.
Yeah, I saw. I'm remembering now.
Yeah, like a year long thing, and you're a lawyer. That's just how our legal system works, boys and girls.
So, does it mean you have to wear all those attire,
If I become a barrister, which I think got my Indian dad very excited that thank God you're going to do equity and trusts, and I'm like, I hate math, I'm never doing equity.
Especially for Shivani, what more or less you finished your degree here. So what did Dundee do to you in a couple of sentences?
What did Dundee do to me? What?
Might have to close your ears for this one.
It ruined me. No, I think it's definitely exposed me to a lot of different people that I never thought I'd encounter, a lot of different not situations, that's the wrong word, but sort of perspectives and just different lifestyles and livelihoods and things I'd never, experienced. I think it's really opened me up to different backgrounds for sure, which I think, like I was saying earlier, London's in its own bubble. We don't know anything, and I think it's provided me with a lot of sort of, especially with you, Abdullah, and different lecturers, just really opening up how we think about things, and like that sort of not only confidence in what you can do with what you already have, but also how to go forward with that, which I don't think, as most people that I know have sort of taken away from university, I don't think that sort of, sense of almost, I can do something with my life now. I know what I'm doing with my life. That's been really important. But also, yeah, just that exposure to different, like a different life, basically. I think it's quite important to take away when you move away from home.
Especially with me, I always think that, coming to university, any university in the world, is a gift. It's a serious gift. And especially if you can travel a bit, if you can go to another country, another place, another city, another town, and mix with another people, another culture, I think that's quite amazing. And I think you were quite clever. You went to Australia as well
Yeah.
during your 4 years degree. So you stayed
Yeah.
one year in Australia.
Mm.
What an amazing story, isn't it?
Well, that was one of the best things, I think. Not to say that leaving Dundee was my highlight, but
But at the same time, like Dundee made
gave
that
you that tool, yeah.
So gave you that special gift as well. So,
Yeah, which I think is great because, again, like I said, with learning about Scotland, I didn't know anything about Australia when I went there. You know what you know from living in the UK, but so many things about Aboriginal communities and sort of different islands that surround Australia and New Zealand and all those countries in their history, and how sort of it's very recent history that people know nothing about. Like, sort of, I was telling my friends the other day about the forgotten, I want to call them the forgotten generation, or the stolen generation. Never ever heard of them, but like that opportunity to go there and hear those from actual Aboriginal people and people who identify as part of that community, I think that's like an experience that you only get from going to certain places. Almost similarly with Scottish independence, you don't know about Scottish nationalism or independence until you go there and speak to people who live there. And I think that's one of the best things about learning in different countries, is that you learn from like a first-hand source rather than a textbook that tells you sort of that construed view that they want you to know from. Like, they want you to learn from that perspective. So that's one of the most important things about going away.
Like, I'll just add here, like, in one of the things, like, as a teacher, university teacher, so we kind of see you guys for 4 years, your journey. So like when you come to like the end of your degree, I mean, we feel good about that, because I know that Shivani will be fine, Josh will be fine. I know these people grew so much, like they are so good now, so I'll not worry about like Tara or like the people I taught, because I saw them. My God, they are so powerful now. I think that's the best feeling, that I'll not worry about Shivani. Wherever she goes, she'll do it. She'll make it. Josh will be an amazing teacher. Like, I mean, so I think that's the best part of this job. You can see the actual outcome. And part of me, I'll always like try to keep in touch with my former students. So if I go to London, if Shivani is a barrister, I think I have to make an appointment to like see her.
Not for you, still never.
I think these are the good stories. But I think that coming to universities is absolutely so important for everyone. And if everyone can be, like you guys, then you can see the quantum leap change for the society, isn't it?
My kind of experience was, I just remember when I started and thinking about, I didn't really expect much from it as an experience. I didn't have many expectations because I didn't know many people who'd been, including my family. There's only one in my family who's been to university, and he did really well, really well. So I had very, very low expectations, and also very, very high levels of misunderstanding about what it involved, because I didn't know. I had no person to kind of turn to speak about those issues with. So that's kind of where it started for me, was really at the bottom, and just remembering how out of place I felt. And then that's kind of going off what you said, Abdullah. It's like, you go through that 4-year process, and that's what it is. It's a 4-year process in Scotland. It's not a 1-year thing. It's not something that just clicks. It's not a light bulb moment. Some people say that. It's like, oh, well, there must have been a time when it just kind of clicked, and it's not. We all, I'm sure, especially this year with the restrictions, there's been times where it's been a real uphill battle. And I'm sure Shivani will, I know you're all nodding, I'm sure Shivani will nod at dissertations in that context. So, there's been times where it's been a real challenge, but what pushed us all through is, one, getting to the end, and two, just realizing as well that that's our kind of natural endpoint now with that submission. That was it for me. I know it wasn't for Shivani, but it was for me. I was done. But I think, yeah, in terms of the more immediate things that I kind of got from it, or maybe not immediate, but things which I developed through it that you can kind of call skills. I think I've always been a kind of outgoing person, but I think my confidence was perhaps a kind of arrogance when I was younger, whereas now it's a genuine kind of desire to do things in the world, to get involved in things. So like leading a magazine, I'd never have done that because I'm not a creative person, I'm really not. But clearly there's something that's creative, otherwise I wouldn't have done it. I think, yeah, it's been just a very strange experience to try and kind of filter down into basic words or skills. I think it's just taught me so much more about me than I ever thought it would have done. When I applied back in 6th year at high school, I never had, as I said, there was no expectations about it as a process and experience. And I think because of that, I struggled initially, but also because of that, it's just allowed me to open my eyes to every single possibility and to also take advantage of the possibilities that being at uni's, presented me with. But I think, yeah, that idea I spoke about before, it's like it's allowed me to go around the world without, leaving my home. I think that's a really powerful thing. And yeah, just giving you this level of, it is confidence, but it's not. It's more just this ability to be able, like we've just done today, you can speak about so many different topics without, having done any specific thing on a particular issue. You can cover so much. I think that's something that being at university does for you. You feel comfortable communicating. I still maintain that communication is not just the most basic human quality, but it's the most vital. And it's so important. And I think that's what universities helped me to develop.
Like, and with me, like, I think the best part of coming to university is, I think people become kind. I don't know, like, because I think, Shivani is kind, Josh is kind. I think that's very special for me. Because I think after leaving university and doing all those things, I don't think you'll be an unkind person anymore in your life. That's
not.
Because I think one thing university teaches is kindness, and also the compassion for, bigger things.
I think that's what's interesting when you couple that idea with studying in a place like Dundee, because Dundee's such a small place, and there's such especially with what you said before about kind of left-wing politics, there's obviously such a strong history in Dundee of working class, I dare use the word struggle, but definitely a kind of working class politics. Obviously Labour dominated Dundee politics for a long time, and there was clear links with trade unions as well, and some of those links are still endure today. But yeah, I think I've kind of naturally been that way. I think I would like to think I'm quite empathetic, but I think that's something that learning does to you anyway as a human, because you have to come at things with an open mind. You have to be prepared to accept different views. And I think that's what people who want to learn always do, or should do. Maybe not always do, but always should do, is have that open approach to people. And I guess when you couple that with me, I've worked as well, still do. And I think, you always have to have that kind of manner where you're quite willing to listen to, speak to, engage with other people, other humans, because, however you like to dress it up, we all are the same in that respect. We're all human. So, why put all these barriers up, these artificial things which just do everything to try and counter that notion of humanity?
This is a totally different time, different kind of situation we never faced in our lifetime. And I think it really made us, like, I think, much more stronger.
I think it's made everyone a lot more empathetic as well. People who would generally just, be dismissive of other people, or sort of communities being dismissive of each other. There's no sort of rich and poor anymore. There's no, there is, but there was no sense of that at the time. It was it's going to affect everybody.
Yeah.
So why not be empathetic towards each other and support each other to come out of it together? Because it's not about which community makes a difference. All of you have to cooperate to, you know, survive.
It kind of feels like a test for the human race, doesn't it? It's like, you know, if you can't deal with this, then you'll struggle with anything else. Because I think fundamentally, COVID has taught us that value of empathy, but that's also what it's about. It's also about empathy. It's also about recognizing that, you know, in India, there was a huge outbreak, you know, on a scale we can't even compute here because of the difference in population size and the difference in resources required to combat that accordingly. But, you know, there is at least now a recognition. You know, we sent some ventilators. There's like the global vaccine pot as well, which clearly isn't enough, and clearly Western lives are being prioritized for the vaccines. But, you know, it'd be interesting to see, you know, in another sort of scenario, how the response might change or might have changed, if we knew where we'd be. So it feels like a huge kind of simulation for the human race at the moment. And I think that's what, it doesn't help when you're switching on the news and it just feels like someone's almost feeding a new thing into the system. Okay, so there's now a variant. Okay, what do you do? You know, okay, this happened. Okay, what do you do? You know, there's now an outbreak in this part. Okay, what do you do? You know, in Scotland, there's rise in Glasgow. Okay, what do you do? There's a council area that has an outbreak as well. You know, what do you do? And it feels like firefighting.
Yeah.
It feels like we're constantly trying to suppress, and that's exactly what we're doing. But it feels like a real test of, especially with climate change in the background, it's a kind of paradox situation we're in. It's very bizarre. We're living in this moment where there's not just one, there's two, there's three, there's four existential threats to our planet, and our human lives. And it's such a weird moment to live in and to feel and to just, it's such a strange thing to put in your head.
No, I totally agree with that, because it felt like, especially last year, continuing into early this year, you had coronavirus, and before that, my biggest fear was, you know, climate change and all that kind of stuff. That's an ongoing battle in the background. Then you have COVID, and then come March you had like the big Black Lives Matter movement, and then after that you had that's continuing. But I think people just keep taking big movements and then chucking them aside after a little bit, and then a new one comes up, and then a new one. Then you had Sarah Everard, and then you have the Palestinian issue right now, and all of this kind of stuff keeps popping up every day. But then when you physically are stuck in a room, and all of this information and all of these issues are being chucked at you, you feel empathetic, and I think that's almost sort of it's suppressing people, because you're so empathetic towards all of these things that suddenly you're so overwhelmed that you want to completely disassociate yourself from it. So it's like this weird thing where we've become more empathetic, but it's also become so overpowering to a point where you're like, what can I do?
I think it's kind of tied to just the perception of powerlessness as well. You know, like what you said, like, what can I do? I mean, there's absolutely nothing you can do about a lot of these things. You just have to live through them. You know, the pandemic, it's like, when will the egg timer run out of sand? You know, when's the sand going to run through? Well, we don't know. You know, and it's funny, you always hear all these experts on, and that's kind of, there's always that in the background. Every answer is kind of qualified, you know, well, we can agree to this ease of restrictions, but, you know, but we don't know what could happen, and blah, blah, blah. And I think it is that kind of powerlessness. And I think that's where the empathy can kind of stem from, is that powerlessness, because now we know what it feels, even just in a tiny sense, what it feels like to be in that situation, this situation. And I guess that's kind of with hyperconnection now. Everything's recorded on social media, on news, on the internet. Like you can visit, as I've said before, with kind of politics, you can visit anywhere on the planet just about and see it without leaving. But you're also exposed to all of the kind of issues that come with a particular place, or the global challenges we face as well. We like to use the word mental in Scotland. It's just a bit mental. Everything's a bit mental. What do you do?
bonkers.
Bonkers, yeah, I love that.
I think it's really interesting to see how that's changed over the year as well.
Mm.
Whereas at the start, it was so much of a sort of, oh, it's not our problem, it's China's problem. There are people dying in China, let them, like, it's their problem. Let's stay out of it. And now a year later, when we've realized how much we are all connected to each other, regardless of where things come from, or where people come from, or what background they come from, I think it's really, that's been a really interesting change to see, that people are suddenly, you know, let's send ventilators to India, because we've realized that we are all interdependent almost. That sense of realization has been quite interesting, quite positive in a sense.
Okay, so last couple of thought, I mean, so in terms of your graduations.
What's that?
That's a raw
that's a very raw.
What does that word mean?
So like this will be online, isn't it?
Yeah.
I still saw like the students know that it's a kind of the rule that when you finish your dissertation, you take some picture, you go to university. I saw like Shivani ended up with like going to university campus and then took picture. I think Josh, did you do it as well?
I had no photographer. What I did was I went down to our building, the Scrimger building, and I just had like a photo just of the dissertation against the backdrop of the building. So yeah, maybe in the future, maybe that will be our graduation. We'll just kind of hold them up online, and smile.
Yeah,
it's kind of screenshot. Yeah, that'll be our graduation. But no, I think do you know what it is? I think for so many people, it's just that it's a huge memory. Nothing else. It's a huge memory, and that's not just a graduation. Just obviously with dissertations 2 years ago, they would have been handed in physically.
Yeah.
Mine ended up being 150 pages because I had to put my ethics forms in my dissertation. So, I think for a lot of people, university experiences have felt really distant, really, really distant. And I think with taking the photos, there we go. I
got mine printed just because I wanted to feel something.
Yeah, I did print. So yeah, I printed my thing. But I just think we've all felt so distant from each other and from the experiences that even more so this year, taking the photos was just it's a huge visible reminder of the work that we've all done to get to our endpoints and what an effort we all put in. I think, we must be some of, and no discredit to people who've graduated in the past, some of the most resilient people mentally, I think, to continue with university work during all of this, going into the prospects of no prospects, basically. And going into this kind of post-COVID world where you don't even know if the thing that you wanted to do will exist because it might now not be viable in this new environment.
Yeah, I think the things about like taking pictures and, a graduation and stuff, that feels like a rite of passage. It feels like we need some sort of acknowledgement of the fact that we have done all of this. And especially when everyone was like, why are you taking pictures? Like, you're not even handing it in person. Why are you taking pictures of like your dissertation? But it's some sort of normality to how you are meant to, how this is supposed to end.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't supposed to end with 3 seconds of our name on a screen whilst Grub or someone else calls our name out kind of thing. It's like that sort of, where's that recognition that we have actually done something very difficult, that's difficult in itself, but then also in these circumstances. So I think it's just like, I was thinking of getting a cap and gown and just pretending like I've graduated at home, because it's that sort of, let's feel normal about it.
I mean, we can do that kind of in the through Zoom, like Zoom graduation, no?
Yeah, just everyone stand there like this.
Everyone just poses. Yeah, we just do like class screenshot. Yeah.
Get a ribbon from I don't know, some sort of arts and crafts shop and just stand there with a piece of paper pretending it's your degree.
Well, that's the best part. We don't even know when we'll get our degree certificates.
Oh, that's
We could be waiting months. Who knows?
It's just.
I mean, this like during this graduation time, we have those garden parties, and those are like amazing, you just drink so much. For
do a massive socially distance one on Magdalen Green.
2-3 days. I mean, I think that will be the absolute miss. No, I just don't want to miss those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's also graduation's the last time you'll see so many people
Yeah.
that you spent 4 years of your life with.
But also, I think it's nice to see, the parents as well. So these people worked behind the scene. Went through lots of, their own struggle as well. So just like saying hi to them and then, knowing them.
But also, that's also why I think doing the photos and the printouts and things like that are, I mean, my success is as much for me as it is for the people who contributed to where I am today, right? Because that's what success is, for me. That's what it is about.
Thing, isn't it? So
yeah, of course it is.
Family, your friends, and all those.
Yeah, they can tell all their stories about what you did. Yeah, absolutely.
For me, like graduation is some kind of closure from that.
Yeah, I was just
journey. End of journey. So I did it, I've won that, It's just like, winning the World Cup, having that
consolidation of everything. It's like I've actually,
You know what I think it is?
Appreciation I deserve.
I think it's just the moment where it all becomes real, and we won't know what that feels like. Because for me, okay, I know officially we haven't graduated, but like everything's been submitted and it's all done. As far as I'm concerned, it's finished. I'm done. But I don't even think when we get the confirmation of our final results, it will feel real. I just don't think it will, because we haven't had that opportunity to close the book. We haven't had that moment to see each other. We haven't had that last time to be together. We just haven't.
Yeah, we haven't.
It's a whole year and a half of university.
It's like that handing in of like, we didn't know when our last lecture was. Mine was, I think, a time, it was a room in Dalhousie with Edzia saying, "Oh, I'll see you in 2 weeks." So we're going into like some sort of little shutdown for 2 weeks.
I was in my theorizing politics tutorial with Scott and I think 2 other people. But I remember being in the Dalhousie building as well. Yeah, would have been.
I remember just saying, "Oh, we'll see you next year. Maybe it will last over summer. We'll see you in like
Yeah.
Didn't know that was the last time you'd see people in person.
Like when you become like a bit philosophical, you can see like the whole like absurdity of our existence. Suddenly everything can change, forever. Because I still remember. I think I was teaching like Josh and then your group, neutral group, in like Dalhousie building. I think it's 3rd year module.
Yeah, UN.
And they're talking about so this like coronavirus. It's like. So like coronavirus is just coming, and then you don't need to worry about it. Just like washing it with hands, and then it'll be fine.
We had a guest. Remember, you had the guest. We had the guest speaker.
Yeah.
And we were in the scrimgeour, the room there, and I made the bovril, and then we kind of thought like, okay, wow, and then that following week, that was it. It just stopped.
Well, for us, Josh, it was the history ball.
Oh yeah, dearie me.
We went to the history ball, and then the Monday.
Yeah.
After we were in lockdown.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually speaking about that the other day. It still just feels so
bizarre.
Unreal. Yeah.
Because it was so normal. It was a big party. We had however many people.
Yeah. Kaylee dancing. Yeah.
Everyone was drinking each other's drinks and whatnot and sharing wine and whatnot. And then the next day you hear Boris on your laptop screen saying, "Oh, that's it. You're indoors for 3 weeks."
Yeah.
Is what we were told.
Yeah.
And that 3 weeks turned into
4 or 5 months.
Oh God.
So it's like surreal, the whole time, the existence, and then idea about you might die as well, it's just like. And especially people like me who suffer from OCD, it's just like ultimate punishment. But
not a good combo.
So it's just I
don't know if anyone feels like they haven't aged, because I went into it being 20 and now I'm 22. And I feel like I've lost 2 years of my life, but I'm like, where I'm not 20 in my head. I'm still 20 because I've not had.
Time feels like it's stopped, but we know it hasn't. That's the problem. Because everyone, I remember I turned 21 in September, and then it was just a case of, we'll just do the 21st next September. So it's like the 21st round 2. And I'm like, but I'll be 22.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I feel like because my whole life I was like big fan of Taylor Swift. So I was like, oh my God, my 22nd birthday is going to be the best thing ever. And I turned 22 on Monday, and I was just sat there like,
happy belated birthday.
thanks. I was just sat there like, what, how, when, what's happening? Like Christmas didn't feel like Christmas. Birthdays don't feel like birthdays. It feels like time's not actually happened.
No. And then you look at it and say, you know, we're in May.
Yeah. It just zoomed past as well. It's
definitely zoomed past, yeah.
And also like the way we lived our life, you know, so we used to go to like hairdresser and ask, you know, cut my hair in a certain way, you know. Suddenly those things are not priority anymore, you know. So I just try to cut my own hair, you know, like, you know, because I don't care anymore. Because I don't care anymore.
Reminiscent homemade fringe that's come out here.
It's like, who will look at me now, you know? Who cares?
Yeah.
So I think the best thing's been the masks, because you can look like crap for anyone else cares, because all of this is covered.
Yeah. The best one is like, you know, wearing glasses as well, and the amount of people who would say they saw you after they saw you, and you're just like, I can't see myself, you know. I have no sense of place in this world now. So
all I see is fog half the time.
Yeah. No, I think lots of good memories as well, no. But also suddenly we face something very existential, you know, our even existence. But it shows like the human beings' adaptability for any kind of crisis. That's when suddenly, you know, you feel like, you know, like if you look at Afghanistan has been going through war for 30 years. See, suddenly war became just normalized. You just do things, not just go for shopping, you know.
You see that already in the UK, you know, for so long, once the pandemic started officially, all we heard about was the idea of returning to normal. Now, in the last since the new year, I've heard that phrase an awful lot less than I did in the year before it. And even just that concept, I think people are far more critical now about return to normal, because they're now questioning more about what that normal was.
Yeah.
I think the hardest thing has been for people like my mum, who has her parents, like her mum and her sisters and stuff abroad. That's been like the hardest thing, is where you're so used to certain aspects. So every summer we'd go to India. That was just like a thing. Never think about it. Every July your tickets are booked to go. That kind of thing has been very difficult to adapt to. But now you're like, I'm so used to speaking to you on FaceTime that almost going somewhere or traveling somewhere feels unnecessary to a point. But I think that's really, like, that's not going to change for a while. I don't think, even with all these green light passages and orange and red lights, it's all, people are still going to be equally, but I'm still paranoid. I'm not going to travel to Greece because it's got the green light kind of thing. But then there are people who are so eager to get back to normal that I don't understand how people are still not extremely paranoid.
This is a tipping point, isn't it? The longer this goes on, the longer it will, the longer it goes on, the more people will question what they did before and what they do now and what's preferable. And like the best example, I mean, the holiday thing is clearly one, but the best example is just people's working life balances, you know, and returning to offices and even campuses, you know. What is the ideal split? You know, should we keep the online lectures and do the in-person tutorials? Should we do in-person lectures and online tutorials? So there's a lot of questions about those sorts of issues. How you strike that balance between making people feel comfortable, but also giving them some of those normal things back again. I'm not sure quite how that will play out.
You know, sometimes these things happen. We call it, you know, this like paradigm shift situation. Things will change forever.
Yeah.
You know, society cannot go back to that thing anymore. So the one example we gave, that, you know, during the Second World War, suddenly, you know, all the boys, all the men went to war. So who'll take care of the other things, the local industries, you know, the shops and other things. Suddenly we men, all the female members of the society came out from their kitchen, you know, used to that kind of society we had, and then, you know, did things which are supposed to be done by the male members of the society. And once the war is over, did you see? They're supposed to go back to the kitchen, but they never did. That's the shift. That's the shift forever.
We're seeing that now. I mean, just the idea of key worker, so people's visions of what they want to do for their career now will be guided by, well, what jobs were still in work during COVID, what jobs were vulnerable. And ultimately, when you look at high streets and, as someone who works on the high street, you do think about that. There will be a lot of people who will now want to retrain and want to, upskill, to use the fantastically horrible Tory language. Let's upskill everyone, okay. But that's clearly going to be a feature of our immediate future is lots of different shifts in things like careers and, of course, degrees.
Okay, so just like very last point, like what will be your advice for the future students who are coming to university? So you don't need to think, just like whatever comes to your mind.
This one came from the gut. You have to take advantage of every single opportunity that you feasibly can. University, one thing you realize now that I'm at the end is a very short period of time in your life. In the grand scheme of your life, it's a very short period of time. And you get a lot of privileges. You don't often think of it that way when you're involved in it, but you do. You get an awful lot of privileges. Access to libraries, you get, you're also, in your own, potentially in your own kind of dwelling or whatever situation you are at home and things like that. You have to use all of that to your advantage, and you really, really have to take advantage of every opportunity that you can, and have fun, because I didn't when I first started. I hated it, and I learned to like it, and then I actually really enjoyed it after that. So, you do have to try and have fun, and remember, I think, as you said, Abdullah, it is a gift, and you have to see it that way. You have to see it as an opportunity. Now that's easier for me because the government pays my place. Shivani's kind of giving me the eye. I completely.
Singles here.
You do. It is a gift for me in that sense because the government pays for me to go. But I'll stop. It's
Josh.
It's definitely something I think, as a Scottish person and as anyone who would be coming either as a Scottish student to Scottish University or whatever the arrangement is, you do just have to take it as a huge opportunity, an opportunity like none other in your life. And I think only when you do that, you'll open your eyes to completely different parts of the world and peoples and cultures and histories. And, I think back now, I would have never have thought I'd have been looking at the Middle East and even writing about the Middle East. That if you'd have said that to me even 2 years ago, I'd have probably thought, no. Whereas now, I can form opinions about that, about the Middle East. That's not something you can do unless you really just chuck yourself in. So be prepared for that. That's my advice. Chuck yourself in.
Good. Shivani?
Mine's pretty much almost the same as Josh. Take every opportunity that comes to you. Don't back down on any opportunity because you don't know how that's going to end up. You could say no to one small thing and that could have been the best thing that you've ever done at university. And really accept the fact that it's a privilege and that not everyone else gets to do it, and make the most of it and don't faff about. And, do you have the opportunity to faff about, but this is like the last time that you will be able to, I think, before you become a serious adult almost. So don't take it too seriously, but also, appreciate the fact that you are in a very privileged position to be here. And don't say no to as many things as you want to, because they probably will end up being amazing things to look back on.
And also, don't be afraid of your teachers or lecturers.
No, talk to them.
Challenge
Especially
them.
you.
Challenge them, and then
challenge them.
I think another big thing, is form relationships with your lecturers and people that you speak to, because you might be intimidated by them, but they will, everyone will come in handy one day. You will learn so many things from each other.
Yep.
So don't just sit at the back of like a lecture theatre, or if we ever get back to a lecture theatre, or don't mute yourself and your camera off kind of thing.
Wow. Be sociable. Wow.
Be sociable, yeah. Do take the most of the people you come across.
Yeah, I couldn't
Like
agree
make the
more.
most of that.
Good. Thank you so much. But this is not the last time you're coming here. We'll do a lot of this kind of talks, you know. Because I mean, this is my community, you know. These are the people I want to live with, you know. So we'll come back again and again, and then, you know, say hi to each other, and then, you know, share our things, our kindness, and I think that's important for us. But even like just talk, I think talk is good talk with good people, with like good things. But also we can learn so many good things as well from you guys, from everyone. Everyone has got something, always something is there. And so absolute pleasure.
Always.
Thank you. I'll see you guys soon. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, Shivani.
Take care.
Take care.
See ya.
Bye.